I'd like to talk a little bit also, and then we'll get into what Professor Merlo has been doing generally in his faculty, because one thing that hit me, and one question that I think we may have as an underlying question, with some of these nominations that we've seen, and with some of the promises that President Trump, President-elect Trump has made, would be the future of science. Are we going to have a dynamic, active future for scientific research, which for America has been incredibly important, or will it suffer? And Professor Merlo, among other things, as I mentioned, and I would like you to give us some example, has under his faculty research, very advanced research in artificial intelligence, which is ahead of us, and it's the frontier. So the first question is, do you fear that scientific research may be limited by a new administration according to these nominations? I refer particularly in the health with Robert Kennedy Jr. And can you give us a reassuring example of artificial intelligence application in your faculty? Excuse me, just one point. I noticed one detail, that the cufflinks of Professor Merlo are White House cufflinks. And where did you get it?
This was a gift that was given to me, and it's President Clinton's inauguration. So that was
fantastic. So
I thought it was appropriate for the occasion.
Very, very appropriate for the occasion. No, we're not looking at that. Okay, back to the question. So, future of science and research.
So thank you, Mario. First of all, let me thank you all. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you today. So I think that this is a very important question, and I don't think that anybody would know the answer. But certainly the importance of funding for science and scientific advances in the United States have been one of the landmarks of what this country has always done. And the fact that even with the ups and downs, the federal government has always been behind on making sustained and important investments in the scientific sector, it's something that would be a dramatic departure if indeed we were to see a direction in that way. Now, talking about the nominations of the cabinet that may make us think that we could go one direction or the other. Right, on the one hand, we have Robert Kennedy, who may very well decide that funding for the NIH or other health organization may need to be trimmed or cut. At the same time, on the opposite extreme, we have somebody like Elon Musk, who's the innovator for excellence, who may on the other hand think that injecting resources into entrepreneurship and innovation is critical. Now, just going to the specific question.
He's also, just to mention, he's also in charge of cutting expenses. Maybe there they will find it. Sorry.
Right. No, and again, I think it's going to be one of these very interesting things that we need to monitor as to how there is going to be some reallocation as well as the desire for cutting. I'm sure we'll talk about that a lot. But vis-a-vis artificial intelligence, I'm actually I'm an optimist by by nature, and I'm also a huge believer in the power of innovation and the power that individuals have, regardless of what is the institutional constraints that they face, to innovate and find ways of advancing the overall mission. So, again, I think that there may be challenges, there may be issues, but my approach is always to think that people will find a way, because for example, artificial intelligence is a huge opportunity for humankind. And just to bring this home a little bit of specific examples where we see the type of truly innovative research coming out of it as part of a university world, one of the areas that has completely changed and opens up enormous opportunities is that of new materials. So chemists and biologists and physicists are always concerned about, how do you combine different elements that exist in nature to create new elements that don't exist in nature, but that can really solve, pressing problems, right? And one of the frontiers is the combination of organic and inorganic material. It's absolutely the frontier of chemistry and a lot of those, related areas. And some of the advances that we have seen are really due to the fact that artificial intelligence allows us to cut by I don't know how many times, more than 100 times, going from the conception of an idea to the realization of what is the likelihood of success of that particular combination, right? I mean, the old-fashioned way is to you do computer simulations, you have to do laboratory experiments and try to combine materials, and you have a lot of failures, and the rate of failures is very high. But now artificial intelligence has allowed us to conceive of things and simulate it in a shift make reality, virtual reality, that has then now allowed scientists and researchers to only focus on the few examples that have a very high likelihood of success. Like, for example, there is very recent research that have produced materials that are a combination of organic and inorganic materials that, for example, allow you to produce a pole that is the size of that the post that that is holding the camera, and one of these is equivalent to planting 10,000 trees vis-a-vis the ability of absorbing carbon. So in terms of carbon capture, so in terms of possibility of advancement for the environment and for trying to combat climate change, these are the type of advances that are really going to be transformational. Now, the importance of support and funding coming from the federal governments is critical, but only to the extent of the speed and the size. I really don't believe that any one administration or any one minister could get in the way of these type of advances that are truly going to be transformational.
Yes, and and also because we have a Congress, and so it's going to be interesting to see what will happen with some of the confirmations. But anyway, so this is just an example, I guess, of the challenges ahead of us, because America has always been ahead of the game with science, and we don't know what this administration will do. It will be very interesting to see whether Musk can, as you said, act as a counterbalance. Now, let's move a little bit more into the economic. I'd like to address some of the economic issues ahead of us, and then the relationship with Euro and NATO and so on and so forth. So let's start with tariffs. We don't have yet, Trump has been very quick in naming the Secretary of the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Health, Secretary of Defense, but we don't have yet a Secretary of the Treasury, and we don't have yet a Secretary of Commerce. The two names that are mostly chatted about are Robert Lighthizer for Secretary of Commerce and Scott Bessent for Secretary of the Treasury, who is a hedge fund manager. John Paulson, who was on top of the line, has announced that he was going to withdraw. So the announcement that the president has made were quite clear: 20% across the board for any imports from any country, including Italy, and about 60% from China. And this is creating quite an impact already in the real economy, because there are American manufacturing companies that are here that can build, but they import some parts and materials from China. So what kind of impact that will have? What is your impression of these tariffs? And how do you think can impact the bilateral trade with Italy?
So this is, now let me put my hat on as a scholar, as a political economist. So I think this question and a lot of the considerations, I would like to provide two points of view. One is to look at it from the lens of economics, and then one is to look at it from the lens of politics, and then putting it together and try to understand the political economy of it. So speaking as an economist, This is one of the things that we teach our students, that we have taught ourselves when we go through, through training. It is well understood and known that tariffs are not a good thing, right? So from the point of view of just economic development, economic efficiency, the whole notion about the free flow of goods, services, and people is one of the things that allows really competition and a healthy economic system to make sure that the resources are allocated where they should be, vis-a-vis promoting the overall level of efficiency for an economy. That's what an economist would say, right? But then there is the politics side, and the politics side is, of course, tariffs, like a lot of other things, are instruments that can be used effectively to various degrees to please certain constituents at the expense of others, or to be used carefully.
Right, but they are also allowed by the WTO in certain
Sure.
cases if certain countries are not acting in real competition and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, and again, they're a well-used and well-understood instrument. So 100%. So the question is really what to expect from this administration. And so I would also add that one of the other consequences of tariffs is that, of course, it creates it's a protectionist measure, right? So when you impose a tariff, you're essentially now tilting the balance within a particular economy, because you're protecting certain sectors at the expense of others, which would not be would be covered. And so that also distorts the allocation of resources within an individual economy, not just looking at the worldwide economy. However, again, back to the point, is how a Trump administration could effectively use that. And the question is it going to be a bargaining posture? After all, we know that one of the trademark of President Trump throughout his entire career, but also his first term, is he likes to make deals. And sometimes it takes very extreme postures as a way to announce to the world that he's ready to do such a thing, expecting that people would be willing to sit at the bargaining table and then negotiate perhaps a better outcome. So the question really is going to be, would we expect the tariffs? I mean, as Mario said, he announced already that he's going to do across the board 20%, and then he's going to do extremely high tariffs on China and other countries that similarly impose extremely high tariffs on American goods. The question is this going to be a short term versus a long term? And I think that the economic impact of that would be completely different. And so I think that that's really the key question. I mean, of course, the narrative and the politics of it is that he announced it, he wants to follow through, America first, make America great again, and all these things are certainly saying, we don't really care whether this distorts the overall economy in the world. What we care about is we want to try to bring our jobs back, we want to try to support certain industries that are struggling. So politically that may be a very good instrument, but then the damage that could do if this becomes a long-term United States of America that now has this level of tariffs imposed, it's another question.
Yeah, I think that one of the calculations has been that if they are staying for long term, meaning 1 year or 2 years, already by 2027, there may be a risk of inflation. Is that right? I think to go back to higher rates of inflation. I don't know if you calculated that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I mean, again, this is where things start to get all interrelated, and the political economy becomes very interesting. Because we all know now that the high inflation of the past couple of years was one of the reasons why a lot of voters were very angry and upset with the current administration. And then the question, of course, is, would that be something that the electorate or that the various constituents that switched from an allegiance to the Democratic Party to voting Republican and voting for Trump, would this be something sustainable if all of a sudden we go back to a high level of inflation? I mean, again, what happens when you have tariffs is that prices go up. Part of it is going to be transferred onto the consumers. Also, in the industries that are protected, you're going to see even more increase in prices. I mean, those are, again, just basic laws of economics. And then the question is, how now is the public who's going to be directly affected by it, right? So the rhetoric is, we love this idea of finally a president looks for our interest and is, really trying to put America first. Yes, but now we are in America, we are seeing the effect of that, and the protracted imposition of tariffs would, for sure, increase prices, consumer prices. And then the question is, what is the political calculus going to be at that time? And of course, this also fits into the whole, and at the same time, what are we going to do with the monetary policy and the Federal Reserve Bank?
Before we move into that, I'd like just to stay a second on trade. Because as an economist, you said we have theories, and these theories tell us something, but then there is politics. And so let's look at that for a second. So in America, we have seen thousands of small towns. I'll give you one example for all. Clairton, which is a small town in Pennsylvania, in 1977-78, had about 25,000 people population. In 2008, there were 8,000, now there are 6,000. And those that are left struggle. Multiply that for a huge texture of America, and you have an issue. Young people are drug addicted, and so on and so forth. Number two, external competition. Some manufacturer, I'll give you one example. In an industry, I was reading a number. Like 2 years ago, there were 3 Chinese producers in a certain industry at a fair, and 15 American producers. Now the numbers have been inverted. There are 15 Chinese producers and 3 American producers. The other companies have closed, the Chinese are exporting, and probably they are dumping their prices. So that's another issue. Finally, the macroeconomic aspect. The US this year will probably have $1 trillion of trade deficit with the rest of the world. And it is since the 70s that the US has not had a surplus in its trade deficit. So is something that, from the US viewpoint, it's a voice that we should hear, enough is enough? How does an economist then respond? How do you deal with this situation where industries are disappearing, small towns are becoming smaller, and the trade deficit is explosive, and America is sustaining the rest, if not with tariffs or something else?
Yeah,
what else can they do?
So actually, again, let me go back to the dichotomy of something that sounds good when you're on the campaign trail, and this kind of relates with people, versus what could happen on the reality when economic forces are at work. So with the issue of cities emptying out, or specific industries dying, again, it all sounds very good for a president or an administration to come and say, we want to reassure your survival, we want to make sure that you get what you need, we really want to fight and protect you. At the same time, let's look at the reality. So go back to the previous election, and let's remind ourselves of the rhetoric that was going around the coal industry, right? With the whole thing about West Virginia is a state that is disappearing, all these communities, they were building on coal mines, and and again, the rhetoric back then was exactly, we are going to protect this industry, we're going to make sure that we're going to continue being producing coal and extracting coal and so on and so forth. That was the politics of it. The reality of it is that economically made no sense. And so regardless of what an administration was talking about, nobody, and I'm talking about the small producers all the way to the the economic forces that are behind the nation, because again, we all know, sure, of course it's critical who's in power and what is the administration and what are the directives, but the engine of society and the engine of the economy are all the the local enterprises that are really maneuvering that.
Well, Antonio, is there something that is changing maybe, and that the economic sciences should start to take that into consideration? Because if you look at the record of the Biden administration, there was exceptional growth, unemployment was the lowest since the 60s, the stock exchange was much higher percentage-wise than during the Trump years, and hit records. The macroeconomic pictures could have not been better, but people were unhappy because real income maybe was down, because inflation was hitting them at the grocery store. So what does tell us? Is this something that economists should start to address? Is there a dichotomy between what, you can tell us that everything is fine, but then Trump wins the elections because people don't think it's fine.
And so, absolutely, and again, the point is, economists should not think just as economists, but they should all be thinking as political economists. And that, the point that you're raising is exactly the, what is the trigger point that moves certain, segment of the population to all of a sudden support one platform or one party rather than the other one. So the reality of so first let me say, I don't think Trump is the cause of the current America. I think Trump is the effect. It's just a manifestation of what's going on. One of the things that has been completely overlooked by all the pollsters who've been constantly telling us what they were thinking would be happening in the economy, is that if you actually look at the level of trust that American citizens have in institutions, has been declining steadily for the past 10 years. And the fraction, for example, the Gallup poll every year releases the results, and they break it down and they ask you, what is your level of confidence or trust in the military and the Supreme Court. And if you actually look at what has happened with the confidence with the federal government and Congress, it's below 10%. The fraction of the population that says that they really trust and believe and support the federal government is at 10%. So the point that I'm trying to make is that all these political factors say that we cannot just have an economic policy that is completely ignorant and devoid from recognizing that there are segments of the population that are very unhappy and they're going to vote with their feet by essentially leaving one political party for the other. At the same time, I am not 100% convinced that any administration or any policy announcement can change the fundamental mechanics at the ground level of the person who's in charge of a particular industry or a particular product or a particular factor that has to make decisions that are economically advantageous for them. And so I think it's going to be a very interesting give and take, and to what extent the unhappiness of a large chunk of the population that has fueled the political transformation. Because as Mario said at the very beginning, this was a clear-cut result. Right? He won the popular vote. Every single battleground state switched from Democrat to Republican in this election. So this is a reality that is here to stay. And the question is, what are the margins for the economic adjustment that allow you to play in that area without at the same time really start backfiring, right? We also know that the Republican Party has a huge amount of very wealthy donors whose entire livelihood depends on their industries thriving and continuing to maintain a particular position. So some of these measures that one may want to do to make sure that these people living in a particular area who are feeling disenfranchised or unhappy or they're seeing their job disappear, how does that counteract with now saying we're going to make an investment in something that is obviously inefficient and it's a quote waste of money, when at the end of the day the money is not controlled by the people who are making these announcements. So I think it's going to be interesting.
So Antonio, time runs fast when we talk about interesting things. So I will ask you now a few questions because we have lots of ground to cover. I'm not saying yes or no answer, but as tight as possible. So I'm sorry, no, we're still talking. So if you give us a minute, then we'll open later to the floor. But you will be first online, considering you were preempting everybody else, Gisela. So that's good. So let's talk about another figure that is worrying. The U.S. debt. $35,460 trillion, 123% of GDP. Does that worry you or not? We see Japan as, much bigger. Italy is more or less, it's a little higher. So can we live with this high debt and percentage of debt stock to GDP?
Yes, and we have lived with this for a very long time. And every single administration talks about doing something about it, and they don't. Because essentially what we are doing, we are shifting the burden on the future generations. And we keep shifting it and shifting it and shifting it. Politically, I don't think that any of the measures, going back to the tariffs, I think that the rhetoric is not exactly consistent with the reality. I don't think that tariffs would be used to close the deficit. I think that tariffs would be used to make sure that the deficit doesn't grow and to cover some of the shortcomings that a further tax cut may generate. So right now we're already talking about the 2025 tax cuts are set to expire. Everybody expects that they're going to be maintained, but on top they're thinking about some additional measures. So to me, actually, if I have to read the tea leaves, I think that the tariffs are more an instrument that would be used to justify a lack of increase in the spending rather than try to address the issue of the debt. Again, I think it's a wonderful tagline. It's beautiful for politicians to talk about it. I don't think there is a willingness and a desire.
And more importantly, as you said before, to negotiate. That Trump is a transaction kind of a guy, so he will say, okay, I'll hit you with this, so let's sit at the table. We hope that will happen. So, but there is something bigger than Trump somehow that maybe he will have to take into consideration, which is the market. And we have seen the dollar strengthening, we have seen interest rates in the longer curve moving up already. And if that continues, with or without control of the Federal Reserve, and we'll talk about that a little later, something may happen. So what are the market telling us, in your opinion, today?
So, I mean, first of all, let's look at the stock market. Already clearly indicated that one thing that the stock market likes is predictability and stability, right? The fact that after election night, because the result was certain, the market jumped. I don't think is that much a part of knowing that Trump had won versus, Kamala Harris, but more the fact that we know exactly what the future looks like. And so, again, I'm actually a huge believer that the market fluctuations, yes, are affected by the color of the administration, but to a small degree vis-a-vis what are the fundamental economic drivers and forces. So I think we should be reading the signs in the economy independent of the particular administration in place. And I think that there is a reason to be worried that, again, with the interest rate now, trending back up, with the possibility that tariffs are going to bring inflation back up, with the possibility that, reshuffling among different sectors is also going to, have effects on financial aspects. I think that there is a reason to be, concerned that, the euphoria of the post-election results and the victory may be hit by the reality of an economic situation that, after all, just survived, right? What was expected to be a recession and turned into a soft landing, in huge part due to the work of the Federal Reserve.
And that brings us to the Federal Reserve. So we know that Trump has said that he wanted to limit the powers of the Federal Reserve. He also wanted to have Powell, the current president of the governor of the Federal Reserve, out. We know that Powell has said everywhere that he will never step down and that legally it cannot be done. But can Trump change the Federal Reserve rules and make the Federal Reserve not totally independent? The Federal Reserve is not part of the separation of powers, that is part of the Constitution. So it appears that only a regular law will allow to do that. So what is your informed opinion about that?
So, first of all, it's not just that we have a Trump presidency, but we also
and you have 1 minute.
Yep, we have the Republican Party in charge of both the Senate and the House. So the answer is yes, he can. However, that could be an extremely scary move. Again, if you think about the role that Powell played in really changing interest rate in order to maintain the inflation under control, everything could happen. I mean, that could spiral into a truly severe backlash for the economy. So
and for the market
and
will
for the
react
market,
negatively.
yes.
So let's move to Europe. So talk about artificial intelligence. That there are a couple of numbers. The U.S. has invested 300 billion in artificial intelligence. China 120. Europe 20. We have a Draghi report that says Europe has to get its act together. So let's talk about European reaction. What Europe should do if tariffs are increased by 20%, and should Europe get a push to be more united and say, okay, we have to be on our own on many things, defense, research, and so on and so forth. Could this be a good push to bring Europe forward?
It would be certainly a wonderful thing to see. Europe is as you all know, it's a very interesting place because, for example, where do we see the largest investment in artificial intelligence, quantum, and frontier investment in science? Finland, the Netherlands. I mean, it's truly remarkable that we don't hear about Germany or France or the big powerhouses doing it. So I mean, if Europe could sort of like finally come together and have like a more unified approach to investment in technology and scientific advancement, it would be wonderful. I am not an expert of the intricacy of European politics, transnational across the board, but I mean it would be very desirable.
But would you recommend it besides being desirable? Would you think it's a matter of survival for you?
I certainly would. I absolutely think so. Again, if Europe wants to maintain relevance in what now it's going to be a very challenging new alienation of powerhouse. I mean, think about India. India is going to play a huge role into the overall balance of the economic landscape. And India has clearly moved more and more toward, for example, the dealing with Russia, or the relationship with China is also something that needs to be monitored. So if Europe wants to stay relevant, I think it would be very advisable and desirable.
Also because China is also out there, and America will care more about China than Europe. But let's open it to the floor. Gisella, your first question.
You partly talked about this already, but given that Trump is not favorable to Europe, and do you think that he will impose also tariffs on the products of European countries and especially to Italy?
Well, I mean, again, we have to go with what he said, right? And then we're going to see whether that is a bargaining posture, where he's going to essentially expect to sit down, and bargain for a solution that is negotiated. My understanding is that right now is just, saying he's going to impose across-the-board tariffs, right, on all imported goods from everywhere, and then increase it for certain countries that have, more of a, aggressive posture toward trade with the United States. So, but again, to what extent is administration is going to be willing to sit down with individual countries, and Italy, that's to be seen.
And I'm afraid that Italy cannot sit down autonomously, because the European regulation on trade is that happens only at the European level. So there will be no bilateral bargain on that. At least, that is what we know from the regulation. Yes, Ottavio, and then we move there, yes.
Yeah.
Let's gather a few questions.
Professor, I just want to go back to a second to inflation. If I analyze the main
quick questions, please, because
the main reason that Trump was elected is because of inflation in this country. People are fundamentally, the average person, unhappy, and when they saw the food products escalate, and then when they say, oh well, inflation is under control at 2.6, but the price is still up here, right? It would have to reverse, which is not happening. I had a very interesting conversation with a well-known economist just 2 days ago, and the issue is that Trump may not understand fully that that's how he got elected. So because of the tariffs and everything else, and which are inflationary, is going to be a real disconnect, and is going to create certainly further unhappiness down the road.
It's something that could be a good political argument, and it could be a short-term thing, and then you are hit with the long-term reality and impact. And I guess we're going to see it very quickly, 2 years from now, when the House election is going to come back on the floor. If he doesn't do something, the prices are going to continue to go up. In fact, every economist that I speak with is already forecasting that things are going to get worse, especially if the price of oil. Because I mean, as you pointed out, even having inflation under control doesn't mean that now we're going to have deflation. Deflation is impossible. It's a nightmare, because then we can't repay debt, because the interest rate would be, so nobody has a desire to have, the price level to start going down. Stationarity is the best, but unless something is done, there are going to be political consequences.
Okay, let's collect just a few more questions. We'll get them all together now.
To put his pronouncements for the tariffs into perspective as to what he says will happen versus what we believe will be reality, could you look back to 2016 when he made pronouncements versus what actually became effective, so we can kind of get an idea, gauge, is this really going to happen and to what extent?
Okay.
Yes, we're talking about potential drivers of higher inflation in the future, tariffs. I'd like you to comment on what might happen if, in fact, he will go ahead with the extensive attack on immigration and that he talked about, and how that may impact prices going forward.
Recently has been pretty aggressive with the current commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission. It's going to change the policy, it's going to change
You mean Lina Khan
Lina
and
Khan,
all of
yeah.
that?
My question was, I mean, it seems to me there is a bit of a disconnect now between the macroeconomics indicator and the microeconomics. So I wonder if you think AI could be used to understand how the economy is changing. I mean, maybe not all principles have changed, but I think they will change given the new
Seems that we
society.
expect an algorithm from you.
No, that actually what I was wondering, maybe we could work on that together.
I was wondering if you have any concerns in terms of his relationship with Russia, in terms of his already outsized role in the conflict there over the last couple of years, stopping the Ukrainian attack on a naval base, and just last week an apparent total flagrant violation of the Logan Act, meeting with an Iranian ambassador about U.S. policy. I wonder what you think about that.
Andrea.
Professor, I cannot resist the temptation, given your role, that you give us a little bit of a feeling of what are the expectations in university and university world with this new administration. We are coming out of very turbulent years in colleges, and I know this has not been an easy time for people in your position and all administrators. Tell us what the expectations are, what could happen, any scenario for us who are not in the academia. Thank you.
Yeah, why don't we start with that? Because one question I had in the beginning was, how did you manage to survive? I mean, we've seen all, president of universities, being cut off, attacked in Congress, and you and NYU, you're still here. So tell us, what's the secret?
Oh, it's because I'm Italian, of course. So no, thank you for that question. So every university in the country at the moment is grappling exactly with just enumerating and understanding what are the multiple ways in which the world of universities and the higher education system in the United States can be affected by it. Of course, let's also remind ourselves of all the attacks that have been, happening over the last year or so on just how elitist universities are, right? On dismantling the support to higher education. I think that the vice president himself said, something along those lines. So, one point is exactly going to be how universities around the country can, reaffirm and show the value proposition of the importance of the higher education world with respect to the advance of the country and the world, because for example, New York University is truly a global university. Over a quarter of our student population, all the way up to a third, are international students. Many of them go back to their countries, and so it's an important engine for change. So. Among the list of things, private universities don't have to worry, for example, about the cutting on federal funding that public universities are going to be very concerned with. But however, the impact of, for example, cutting the NSF or the NIH budget may really have very severe consequences on what can be done. And then, of course, the thing that is front and center is the future of immigrants. So, again, going back to the 2016 election, when he announced that he would eliminate the DACA program, we actually have students who are DACA students. We have the sons and daughters of illegal immigrants all around our universities, and they're terrified right now. I mean, to be quite honest, the point is, will universities be able to shield whatever impact of a massive deportation policy that could be implemented on that. Again, I said at the beginning, I'm an optimist. I would not be doing my job if I weren't. I remain an optimist because I do believe in the collective power of universities. And this is actually a great sign where presidents from all the universities are coming together, deans and provosts, and we are all having these conversations because it all affects all of us. So this is not like what can NYU do to put itself in a competitive advantage to Cornell, right? And it's like NYU, Cornell, and all the universities, we are all in the same boat and we're trying to figure out.
Antonio, let me attach a provocative question to that. We know that a good portion of the vote that voted for Trump was very upset with woke cancel culture and with all the kind of political correctness and Me Too and transgender and so on and so forth. So all of these movements really started and are very much sustained in the universities among the younger population, and very often, especially cancel culture, is part of a flag for many professors that want to change history, for example, no? The way, the traditional history, the founding fathers, the values, and so on and so forth. So the question is, how responsible are universities for the election of Trump? And how can you, and do you think that it went too far, the pendulum? I know this is delicate. We don't want you, the student, to demonstrate against you, so you may restrain, or we keep this question totally off the record.
So if you asked me what was the secret for me to keep my job, I respectfully take the fifth on answering this question.
Okay, so we'll have a coffee and then we can discuss it on an off-the-record basis. Let's go back to the trade. I think there was a group of questions related to tariffs and trade and immigration.
Yeah, I think there was a question about going back in history and seeing can we learn from what happened there. I think that the situation there was completely different, and completely different in two respects. Number one, he was not elected with a popular mandate, right? So even though he won the election, there was there were a lot of very contentious issues that were up at the top of the political agenda that came before the whole notion about protectionism and tariffs. So I don't think that we can really learn much from what happened back then. I would say the second reason is that one character that is completely missing from the conversation now and was front and center back then was Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro was his main advisor on tariffs and he is nowhere to be seen. So I would say, of course, we can do it as an academic exercise, but I don't think we're going to learn much by doing that.
So on the question of regulation, which is a key question, because there is a point where the extreme touch, and so Lina Khan, who's the FTC, and she's a big supporter of dismantling the big corporation, the big high tech, is supported by the new Attorney General that will be in charge of the Justice Department, of the Antitrust Department. So what do you think the future will give? I mean, will there be a fight within the administration? Do we think, markets were happy for the regulation, compliance maybe will go down? But so what that was, a much wider question.
Right, and again, I think, none of us has a crystal ball, but I do hope that this is not going to lead to, a situation where all of a sudden, we're going to go after this big corporation, trying to chop them up for political reasons other than for economic reasons. I mean, after all, I don't think the United States can afford to go, aggressively after, some of the major players. But I do believe, again, it's interesting because when you look at the cast of characters that are right now in cabinet, the only commonality that you see is that they're all Trump loyalists, but I don't think they see eye to eye with each other on specific issues. And so the interesting question is really going to be which side is going to take precedence and what are going to be the priorities that he's going to set out to say, for example, in my first 100 days, these are the things we're going to worry about. So again, I think this is one of those areas which is filled with landmines. And again, he's very combative. He likes to take this, very provocative views. Again, is this a posture to sit down at the bargaining table and come to some, better solution, which is also palatable and appeasing the general public, or is it going to be something that becomes a priority, like building the wall the Southern Wall was, back in the 2016, right? It became the one thing that, every time there was the photo op. And so I think that the question really is going to be how are things going to be prioritized? And I think there is a domino effect. Depending on what are the early moves, is certainly going to have a lot of, trigger effects on other aspects, like the appetite for deregulation or for going after big corporation or, to really try to, enforce antitrust regulation. So again, I think the future will tell. I know it's not a very satisfactory answer. And I would just touch on the question about the impact of, if indeed we were to have a massive deportation, that's going to have humongous impact on the economic balance and on, prices and wages and the structure of industries. I mean, there are entire sectors that rely on immigrant labor. And so again, it's one of those things that, in a vacuum seems like a great idea, especially when you color the language with, getting rid of murderers and rapists and drug dealers. But then the reality of it is you're going to get rid of, a working class that is extremely embedded within communities in so many different parts of the United States. So again, the economic calculus versus the political calculus are very different. And I mean, to be honest, I don't know. I think it will literally boil down to what becomes the first big signature move, and then that's gonna have a spillover.
Last question, we had the Musk role, Musk factor,
Yeah.
and then the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, so and again, you combine two things, right? I mean, you talked about the spillover that would have on the balance of power and the relationship with countries like Iran or Russia, right? And the specific ties that individual members of the Trump administration have. Like, I think that, I don't know if it's the sense of this room, but if I were Ukraine, I would be very worried. Right? I mean, I don't think that there is anybody right now that thinks that this is going to be something good happening in that respect. So again, the issue with Musk is that there are two things at place here. He is by far the most successful entrepreneurial person of his generation in terms of seeing things that nobody has seen before. The whole notion, I mean, Mario and I were talking about, the whole notion about space travel open to the private sector. It's something completely transformative and revolutionary. So there is a part of Elon Musk that really has proven that, really things that are, perhaps not even in our imagination could happen, and it could have a beneficial effect on that. But then the question is, what is the other aspect, which is the truly problematic one of, will we be able to separate and get some of the positive pieces of what you would bring to the table, or are we going to be essentially saying, the other side of what happened to, formerly known as Twitter and X, all the policies that he was trying to implement at the, at the company level that decimated, right, and completely alienated and really produced very negative results. And then, once it's colored with the politics of, the avoidance of protocols or the norms of behavior for diplomatic relations. I mean, we have experts, certainly more than me, to talk about how diplomacy is going to play a role. But yes, it's going to be interesting to see where things are going to fall.
Okay, I think we addressed before the artificial intelligence question, so we could keep talking, but we'll have work in progress. We will see what the Trump administration will do. It will be a very interesting, challenging time, and we have to admit that some innovation will come from this. We will keep discussing them here at GEI. Thank you for coming, and please welcome the German.